put all the things in. So when we are stretching our hamstrings, it's really important to know that we don't live in no muscle group lives in isolation in the body, and the hamstrings are no different. And when we have a lot of tug on our sit bones, so just to be clear, your hamstrings attach from your sit bones to the backs of your knees, and you have three main muscles, plus a like three and a half. I always like to say you have a smaller one too that doesn't go all the way up to your sit bones. But those muscles, not only do they help bring your foot toward your butt, so they, flex your knee joint. But it's very important to realize the impact that your hamstrings have on your pelvis and therefore on your low back. So because they attach onto your sit bones, that's part of your pelvis. And when they get tight, they can so like if this is your backside, if they get tight, they can pull the sacrum, or not the sacrum, but the sit bones down this way. And it can cause us to have this kind of action where we are like kind of tucked when our when our sit bones get pulled. So having loose hamstrings allows us to have some mobility in the pelvis, which is really helpful for keeping the rest of the spine in good shape. So one of the things to always remember when you're stretching, we're going to do some deep hold, long stretch stuff with our hamstrings today. And when you're doing this, you have to be very mindful to not allow an overstretch to happen for two reasons. One, the attachments on your sit bones can get very tender. And if you've ever had I wonder if any of you put me in the chat box if you've had a hamstring tear at some point in your life. But if you have torn your hamstring, it can be a shadow that lives on in you for a long time. So we want to be very careful to not overstretch at our attachment sites at our sit bone. So the best way to do that is to have a soft bend in the knee when you're stretching your hamstrings sometimes. So this will allow the pelvis to move. When the hamstrings are not taut, we can stretch them by moving our pelvis instead of just pushing our knees straight. So there's a lot of mobility that can happen in the pelvis that can help us not only lengthen our hamstrings, but have the hamstring length affect our back. So because forward folds in yoga, I tend to shy away from them a little bit because a lot of people it doesn't feel very good in their back to have a lot of deep forward folding. So when we do this, we're going to do some seated postures today. And when we do this, I want you to be very mindful that it's totally fine to bend your knees, that you can do a seated forward fold with your knees bent. And this will allow the pelvis to do a lot of that moving so that you're not locked in on the pelvis and then stretching your back when you're coming forward into a forward fold. So if you are, I'll do it standing. If we're in a standing forward fold and you bend your knees, your pelvis has lots of movement to roll over your femur bones. But if you lock your knees out and you go forward and that's where your hamstrings end in their stretch, the only thing that's going to go stretching is your back, right? And you're going to have a whole lot of taut. If the hamstrings are pulling this way and your spine's trying to go this way, there's a tug of war happening, and this can be very challenging for your back. So it's better if you are trying to work with the forward fold to bend your knees a little bit so that your pelvis can roll, and that way your back is not going to come into this rounded posture, which can be very detrimental for the low back. So remember that when we move into forward folds today, that the movement of the knees can help the movement of the pelvis, which can help the length of the spine. Okay, so let's sit up straight and tall and think to yourself, why would I want to do forward folds? What is it that is good in yoga about bending forward? And we do it all the time in simple poses like Uttanasana and dog pose, but I mean these seated forward folds. And the joy of them is that they're very introspective. There's this deep contemplative aspect of supporting our head, closing our eyes, and coming forward. So while we sit up straight and tall, let your eyes rest for a moment and just imagine, what is it that you need? Some turning inward. These forward folds turn us inward on ourselves. What is in your life right now that needs some introspection, that needs some contemplation? Are you mulling through a difficulty or a challenge? Are you trying to niggle out an answer to a question? Are you busy and needing some time to just regroup? Are you trying to befriend yourself and keep your own good company. There's lots of things that folds can support us with. So let's feel the extension through the spine now. Feel buoyant on your pelvis, where there's a sense of space, that you're not collapsing, that the gravitational pull isn't a weight, but rather just a support. What does it feel like to have the chest broad and free? To open up your breathing, relaxing your eyes. Feeling a sense of softness. Can you allow the belly to move as you breathe? Can you feel the breath travel to the pelvis? Can you allow the eyelids to feel like a little curtain that can just quiet down, kind of like pulling the shades for the busy brain? See if you can feel the darkness inside your head a little bit. Instead of letting your eyes kind of reach out, even trying to see through your lids, can you let the eyes rest behind your lids? Place your palms at your heart. Bow in. Offer an intention. What's here for you? And then open your eyes. And we're just going to start our practice by sitting. So take your hands onto your knees. Okay, and hopefully you're up on something, up on the edge of something. And we're just going to round the pelvis a little bit and arch the pelvis a little bit. So just feel that little cat-cow starting just by sitting here, and move into the breath. I'm just going to read the chat box here. No tears in the hamstrings, but they do cramp sometimes. So hopefully some long stretches can help us lengthen the muscle fibers, kind of teach them that it's reset that point, have the resetting the length of the hamstrings by what we're going to do today. Are you breathing? And just notice what your pelvis feels like, what your sit bones feel like as you roll back, what your low back feels like as you roll back and you roll forward. Can you get in touch with your sit bones now that you're sitting on them? Okay, can you feel where they are? All right, and then find right in the center of your sit bones and see what it feels like to drop, to let the sit bones be like tree roots that are just dropping down into the earth. Do you have a center point? Do you feel balanced? All right, and then let's go ahead and get up and find our way onto our mat. Let's stretch our body out. Come into some length. Breathing well. All right, so lengthen your arms up overhead. Feel that full body extension. So reach right leg, reach left leg, right shoulder, left shoulder. Come into a sense of opening the body a bit. And then bring the knees into the chest and rock from side to side, swaying. Sense into the back. Sense into what it feels like to have a neutral spine. We're going to put our feet down onto the ground. And although when our knees are bent, we don't have quite as neutral of a spine, we almost feel like our low back moves into the floor. See if you can feel the neutral spine. So have a little tiny gap underneath the low back. And notice what the vertebrae in their natural state feel like. Okay, so, and then do a little bit of the pelvic tilting here, where we tip our tailbone up toward the sky and dip our top sacrum down into the earth. Feel that compression where the the low back moves into the floor a little bit. And then just the opposite, the counter nutation of the sacrum, where we're lifting the sacrum up and dropping the tailbone down. So a little seesaw going back and forth. And the sacrum movement is called nutation and counter nutation. And the pelvis movement is called an anterior and posterior tilt of the pelvis. And they usually go in concert with each other, not always. But just notice what it feels like to anterior tilt the pelvis and posterior tilt the pelvis. And the impact that has on the attachments of your sit bones, of your hamstrings, as well as the feeling you have in your low back as you move in different ways. So it's important to start noticing how the low back, the sacrum, and the legs all work together. Okay. Now let's get a neutral pose again, feet gently moving into the floor, and get the sense of widening your sit bones apart from each other. Probably if you try to access that, you've moved yourself into a little bit of an anterior tilt of the pelvis. And this is a good thing. This is an action we're looking for. And then release and relax. Bring your knees into your chest. Soften your low back if it tensed at all. Rocking, circling the knees. And then right knee into the chest. Left leg comes long on the floor. Roll around your ankles and wake your feet up. Feel some deep compression. And if you're holding onto the shin is not good for your hip or knee, try holding onto the hamstring. And that might loosen up the flexion of your knee if your knee is a little unhappy. Switch sides when you're ready. Left knee and right leg stretches long. Find your breath. Wiggle around your feet. Just wake some things up. Okay, and then release that down. Go ahead and grab your strap. And we're going to already go into some pretty deep hamstring stretching. So wrap the strap around your foot. Put the strap around your right foot. Left foot is going to be on the floor, so your left knee is bent. This is a little bit more gentle because our pelvis is in a neutral place versus when our leg is straight, which we'll experiment with in a moment. Reach the foot up, reach the hip down. So foot up, hip down. And see if you can have those opposing actions find each other so that they're melting into the same movement. And notice if you lock out your knee, if you press your knee back, especially if you tend to be hypermobile and your knees hyperextend. Be really mindful to have just a little bit of softness in the back of the knee. Flex your toes toward your face. Lift your heel up. Still a little micro bend in the knee. Root the femur bone down. Move the femur bone away from your shoulder. And all these subtleties will stretch the muscles a little bit more without you just going into lockdown mode in your knee. It's very common for us to want to hike our hip up toward our shoulder. So keep moving the femur bone away from the shoulder. Widen the sit bones a little bit. Stretch through your foot. Spread your toes. Lift your heel. Soften the knee. Root the femur bone. There's so many little things you can do where we're not even moving, right? Okay, now let's go ahead and release that and change sides. So 2 feet into the strap for a moment. And then when you're ready, right foot comes down onto the ground, left foot is in the air. All right, so a lot of times we warm up with some ballistic stretching. I forgot to do this on the other side. So if you don't like the feeling of just going right into a stretch, you can bend and straighten, bend the knee into the chest and then reach it up in the air. So just have a little bit of movement first if that feels better to you. Otherwise, let's just come into the opening of the hamstring. So stretch the heel up. Bring the toes down, spread the bones of your feet apart. Root the femur bone into the earth. Take the femur bone away from the shoulder. Soften the knee. Create a little bit of an anterior tilt to the pelvis. Not a lot, just enough to feel neutral in your low back so that there's a gap underneath your lumbar spine, just a little tiny gap. Not enough, we don't want to push the back into the floor, and we also don't want to overarch. We're just finding neutral. So as you find that neutral low back and a slight anterior tilt to the pelvis, widen the sit bones, root the foot up, root the hip down. How's your breath? Did you forget about breathing along the way? So you can have a really good stretch going on in the calf, the foot, the hamstring without having to lock your knee straight. Okay, and then release. We're going to go back to the first side. And this time experiment, as your right foot comes into the strap, with potentially straightening your left leg on the floor. And you don't have to go all the way straight. You could, instead of having your foot with your knee really bent, you could just walk your foot out a little bit further so that your knee isn't quite as bent, or you can try straightening your left leg on the floor. So if you come into that variation, notice what happens. When you straighten your left leg, does your right hip want to hike up toward your shoulder? Do you lose something in the extension of your left leg? So feel the right femur bone root down, lift up through your right foot, flex your foot, spread out the bones of your foot, soften behind the knee, feel the anterior tilt of the pelvis, elongate the spine. So notice what it feels like to not be smushing your back into the floor and rounding the pelvis. Can you feel the neutral pelvis, the elongated spine, and that you actually stretch your hamstrings more when you do this? So everybody roll your back a little bit. Let your low back move into the ground. Let your tailbone lift up off the floor. And you may lose a little bit of your hamstring stretch. Now tip the tailbone down into the earth. Low back lifts off the floor slightly. Do you feel a greater stretch in your hamstring? So moving the pelvis can have a very big impact on the hamstrings instead of just locking out the knee. Okay, let's change sides again. Left foot in, decide what you want to do with your right leg. Maybe it's on the floor. Maybe your knee is still a little bent and your foot is either close in or your foot is walking away from your pelvis, that right foot. Feel all the things we're trying to feel in these hamstrings. So stretch the left heel up, pull the toes down, widen the foot, spread out the bones. Move your left hip away from your shoulder. Root the left hip into the earth. Find the gap in your low back. Widen the sit bones. Relax the shoulders. Stay in the presence of your breath. So notice, when we bring ourselves alive in these subtle ways, it really enhances the sensation of stretch. And then go ahead and bring 2 feet into the strap. Lift those legs straight up in the air. And then take the strap off, knees into the chest. Rock a little bit and roll over onto your side. All right, so let's come onto all fours. Finding your way into some cat-cows. Moving the spine. We've already prepared a little warming for this movement by the seated cat-cows we did. So just notice as you move here what's available. All right, and then move the pelvis around. Start to wake up the pelvis. So maybe do some circles with your tailbone. Notice what happens in your hamstrings when you're doing this. When you have the dip of your paintbrush down toward the floor, can you feel your hamstrings engage? And when you lift the tailbone up, can you feel the hamstring stretch? And feel the dynamic movement of a circle, that you're not static. You're not holding one position. Go ahead and spin the other direction. And then just move side to side. Become like a fish. Loosen the low back up. All right, curl the toes under. Feel the bottom of your feet stretch. So we're not coming up to dog pose yet. We're just curling the toes under. Lean back toward your heels as best as your toes will allow. Feel the bottom of your feet stretch so that fascial line connects all the way to the bottom of your toes. So see if you can feel that part of the fascial sheath of the back of the legs open. And then come back onto all fours and smack your feet onto the ground. Lift your right leg straight back behind you. Engage your hamstring now and stretch through your spine. Pulse it a few times. Feel the connection of your glutes and your hamstrings, that they work together in extending your leg. Engage through your core, finding the breath. Keep pulsing the leg. And take a deep breath in as you exhale. Round in, knee to chest to chin. Inhale, bringing it out. So allow the spinal movement to happen. So we're allowing a roundedness of our spine. Cat-cows are happening as we lift the leg back and bring the knee in. Feel the conjunction of the spine, the muscles along the spine, and the glutes and the hamstrings. All right, and then put that knee down onto the ground. Shake out your wrists. And remember, you can always come onto fists or put your blocks underneath your forearms if your hands are not comfortable on the floor. Okay, left leg straight out. Notice if your hip lifts up. See if you can keep things square. Widen the sit bones. Inner spiral that leg in the air. Pulse a few times. Start to wake up. See if you can feel the conjunction of your hamstrings and your glutes working in harmony together. How is your breath? And then we're going to swing that knee in and swing it out. So find the cat-cow living in this posture. So don't try to isolate the movement. Let your back work with your hamstrings and your glutes now, both in the extension and in the flexion. Stay in your breath. Okay, great. And then rest back into child's pose. Relax your legs. And if you're forward a bit because of knee or hip flexion issues, come onto your forearms. Walk the hands over to one side. Feel the side body stretch and open. Breathe and let your neck relax. And then come back over to the other side, walking the hands. Melt the skull. And then relax and come back out of there. One more time, we're coming up onto all fours. We're gonna do this a little differently now. Hopefully I'm not gonna smack my foot against my table. So take the right leg straight back behind. Yep, I'm gonna smack my leg against the table. I'll go this way so I don't smack my foot. We're going to square the hips and bend your knee, okay? And we're gonna try to make footprints on the ceiling. All right, so inner spiral the leg. Try not to let the knee turn out. Keep the knee facing the floor and pulse a few times. Engage through your core so you're solid in this movement. Working with some deep work in the hamstrings here, waking them up. All right, and then release. Relax that down. You can come back into child's pose if you want, and then back up onto all fours. Second side, left leg out. Bend your knee, make some footprints on the ceiling. So we're not arching the back, we're keeping integrated into our core, inner spiral the thigh, spread out the bones of your foot, imagine your whole foot lifting. Notice if this is a difficult move for you, if there's challenge in this, because it's not so easy to do. All right, and then go ahead and release. Now you get to come into dog pose. So stretch out your body, hands down, legs, feet on the floor, and lift your sit bones all the way up to the sky. See what it feels like to start at the feet. Spread out the bones of the feet, get them as broad as you can. Feel the heels descend and move not only down toward the ground, but back toward the wall behind you. Feel the Achilles tendon stretch a little bit. Lift through the center of your calves, all the way up through the backs of the knees. Soften the knees. Then lift again from the backs of the knees all the way up to the center of the sit bones. Widen the sit bones. Feel that anterior tilt of the pelvis. See if the dip of your tailbone up toward the sky and the pubic bone can feel like it's passing through the inner thighs a bit. Notice when you move the pelvis, not only do you get a greater stretch in your hamstrings, but it loosens the back. So everybody pull your tailbone toward your heels now, and just notice you lose a little stretch in the hamstrings and you gain some tension in the back. So repeat, anterior tilt of the pelvis. Pubic bone passes through the inner thighs, sit bones widen. Feel the stretch of the hamstrings, push off the hands. Integrate through your core so you're not overdoing an arch. And then walk your feet forward and come into Uttanasana. Bend your knees a lot. Just kind of crouch a little bit. Let the hamstrings soften. Inhale for a halfway lift. Same thing. Sit bones widen. Exhale and melt back down. Soften. Now work the hamstrings. Push like you weigh a whole lot. Push off the floor. Rise all the way up. Bringing your arms to your sky. If you're at all dizzy, just bring your hands to the center, squeeze to the midline. You can even cross one thigh over the other thigh and squeeze. This will lift your blood pressure back up. If you up, down, makes your blood pressure drop. Deep breaths here. Now, hopefully you feel a little alive in your hamstrings right now. Hopefully you're a little back body aware. Soften the knees. Okay, try not to lock the knees out. See if you can have a neutral, stable pelvis. Can you feel the pelvic floor engaged just a little bit? Take a deep breath in, reaching the arms up to the sky. Exhale and fold forward. Relax. Inhale for a halfway lift. Blocks are so nice. Exhale and melt and fold back down. Bring your feet together to touch, unless you know you need a block for a chair pose. So if you need that stability, grab a block and put it between your thighs. Now remember, for joints that are troublesome in squatting, you don't have to go very deep in this pose. And you can also stick your butt right up against a wall or a piece of furniture so that you have some support. And you can be pretty high like this. You don't have to be super low. Go where joints are happy, okay? Arms can go anywhere you want them to be. So obviously, we're working a lot of muscles in our legs. Breathing deeply and see if you can imagine, I've been saying this cue a lot. Imagine you weigh 1,000 pounds and you have to try to push yourself up to straighten. And there's a lot of work that happens in the hamstrings when we do this. So see if you can activate. Nothing's actually moving. And then let's stand up straight and tall. You can keep the block there, but if you're able to do this without the block, it might be easier. We're going to do a one-legged squat, so you can always have your hand to support yourself on a piece of furniture or a wall if you need it. So we're coming into chair pose again, and you can have your arms anywhere you want them to be. We're going to root into our right foot. Our knee is bent as much as we can allow for our joints to be healthy. And we're going to lift the left foot, just hovering it off the floor. This is a lot of work to stabilize through your glutes and your hamstrings. Breathe deeply here. And then 1,000 pounds of pressure. See if you can push yourself up, bringing your knee up high. Place that foot down onto the ground. Remember, balance can be supported. You can hold on to anything you need to, and this pose does not have to go super deep. You don't have to do a super deep one-legged squat. You can just have a little bit of a bend. So stand with your feet together. Hold on to something if you need to. Start in chair pose. Maybe have your arms not up in the air. It might be easier for balance if your hands are out wider or down lower. And see what it feels like to root your energy into your left leg. Hold on to something if you need it, and lift your right foot off the floor. It doesn't have to go far, and you don't have to be deep in order to get the feeling of letting your hamstrings contract in an isometric contraction here. Extend the spine, a little anterior tilt to the pelvis, root the knees into the pelvis, and then 1,000 pounds, push off your foot, lengthen that leg up in the air. And then place your foot down onto the ground. Okay, stand in Uttanasana for a moment. And just notice, are you back body aware? Are your hamstrings, are you aware? A lot of times the energy in the back of our body, we don't always pay attention to what we're feeling in the back because we're so oriented toward what we can see and the moving forward into the world. So enjoy a little sensation in the back of the body. Take a deep breath. Inhale, reaching the arms up. Exhale, folding forward. Okay, place your hands on blocks. Step your left foot back, come into a lunge. Press your feet down, extend the spine, and let's do what we often do, just a little bit of movement. We've already, you might feel fatigued now in your hamstrings, so just let this movement be gentle as we move back and forth. All right, come into a lunge. Rise up. Your back foot can be, let's do that. Let's put our back heel down onto the ground. So like Vera one legs instead of crescent lunge legs. And once again, you don't have to be super deep into this pose in order to gain what we're gaining in our practice today. So go where your joints are happy, and you can bring your leg out to the side more if you need it for a wider stance. Bring your arms wherever you want them to be. And then root your heels, root both heels, press them into the ground, extend the back leg so you feel the glutes and the hamstring kick in, press your front heel into the ground, trying to lift that 1,000 pounds, and feel the back body work for the posture. Okay, great, and then release your hands, Walk the back foot forward, relax, bend your knees, let everything soften. Inhale for a halfway lift. Exhale and move back. Second side, left foot comes forward, right foot comes back, finding a lunge. Okay. Breathing deeply. Enjoy the hip flexor stretch. And then let's go ahead and bend and straighten the front knee. Okay, so finding your breathing. Noticing if you round your spine a whole lot as you stretch that front hamstring. See if you can minimize that. And then find a lunge. Again, plant the back heel down. Decide whether you want your left foot to move out to the left a little bit more for a broader base of support. So you can have heel-heel alignment or a little wider. Okay. Where do you want your arms to be? Do you want them up or out or down or in? Just choose your posture. Root your feet. Now, that back knee, is it hyperextended? Can you extend through the glutes? Can you feel the glutes kick into gear and contract to help you extend that leg without locking the knee? Unlock your back knee and root your heel into the earth. Find your front heel too. Press it down. See if you can feel the work of the back of the body helping instead of just your quads always doing everything. Breathe well. All right, and then come back down, place your hands onto the ground and come to a plank. You can always put your knees down onto the ground. Find your breath. All right, and then when you're ready, everybody put your knees down onto the ground and find your way onto your belly. Take a deep breath, gentle cobra pose, and then exhale and melt back down. One more time. Finding the breath. Exhale and melt back down. Curl your toes under, lift your kneecaps off the floor, and spread your legs apart a little bit further. Okay. We're going to do this in two different directions. So first, just put your hands underneath your head, turn your toes out, and lift your legs up. So obviously the glutes are working. Let's see if you can interlate what's happening in your hips with your hamstrings. And then release and relax. Bring your knees back to neutral, hip width apart, and windshield wiper your knees. So knees are bent, windshield wiper your feet rather. Okay. And now bring your legs straight back, hip width apart. You can choose to go wider or bring your legs together. I'm going to choose hip width apart, but you choose you. And instead of turning our feet out this time, we're going to bring our arms back, palms facing the floor. Everything's going to lift up. And see if you can feel that the hamstrings, the glutes, the calves, and the back muscles all work together to lift you into extension. Exhale and melt back down. Turn your head one side or the other. Breathe here and rest. All right. And then go ahead and come on up to all fours. Finding your way into some swirls in the spine. Sometimes lying on our belly can be very difficult. So just have a moment to release your spine in whatever way feels good. And then when you're ready, find your way into child's pose. Try maybe knees closer than you normally do. And just let all the muscles of the back body relax now. So our hamstrings are soft. Breathe into the back of your body. All right, let's go ahead and find our way to dog pose. Extending through the spine. Pull your feet, the feet are hip width apart. Drag your feet apart from each other to light up the outer hip muscles. Breathing. And then walk your feet forward. Bend your knees a lot. Let the hamstrings be soft. Inhale and rise all the way up. Okay, we're almost ready to get on the floor and stay there. If you're dizzy, take your time to find your midline, squeeze into it. All right, And then just notice, if you, one of the things that happens to us as we, get hunched from all of our lives, right? Being on computers and driving cars and all these things, when we hunch forward, we tend to round the back a little bit and our hamstrings can get really tight. So see what it feels like to engage all the muscles along your back so that you are supported in that upward posture. You are upright, not just, your hamstrings and your glutes are going to work, but it's a very different work. So everybody bend your knees a little bit, round forward, and notice what happens in your hamstrings. So they get locked long a little bit, they get tense. Whereas if we push off the floor, yield, open up our chest, and come into a good, healthy posture, our hamstrings are working in a safer, healthier way than when we are rounded. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and find our way onto the floor now. So come down onto the ground, come onto your back. We're gonna come up onto our seat, but for now, just come onto your back for a moment and rock left and right. Okay, do one more thing to strengthen our hamstrings before we start opening them. Put your feet down onto the ground. You can always choose to do this pose passively with a block under your pelvis or a block between your thighs. Whatever feels good to you. You can have nothing as well. We're going to come up to bridge pose. So lift your pelvis, rock onto the tops of the shoulders. It doesn't matter how high you go. And see if you can feel the work through the back line of the body. Stretch or pull your heels a little bit toward your shoulders to kick in the glutes and the hamstrings. Hug an imaginary block or a real block between your thighs so you're not overdoing the back line, but supporting with other muscle groups. Find your breath. All right, and then go ahead and relax. Put your pelvis down onto the ground. Windshield wiper your knees left and right. All right, very last thing we'll do for strengthening, to activate the multifidus muscles, those muscles that connect one vertebrae to the next in the back of your body. We want to have some activity there so we're aware that we're not rounding the spine. We want to have some extension and length in the spine. So back to the pelvis where we were earlier, see if you can drop the tailbone into the earth, a slight nutation so the top of the sacrum lifts just a little bit off the floor. The tailbone dips down a little bit more into the floor, and then scrub the tailbone up toward your shoulders and see if you can feel that light up like a track up your spine. And then relax, round the pelvis just a little bit, and then anterior tilt, nutation of the sacrum. Pull your tailbone like you had a dinosaur tail. Pull your tail up toward your shoulders. See if you can feel the muscles along your spine activate. And see how, relax, come into a posterior tilt. When you do this, see how high up you can get that activation to feel. So it's pretty common to feel your low back engage, but see if you can travel those multifidus all the way up your spine, all the way to your shoulders. See how far you can get that activation to go when you scrub your tailbone up toward your shoulders. Just going back and forth, resting into a posterior tilt, and then one last time, scrubbing the tailbone up toward the shoulders. You're anterior tilting the pelvis. And release. Bring your knees into your chest, rock a little bit. Some of those muscles should feel a little fatigued. All right, put your right foot on top of your left knee, and let's just prepare our hamstrings a little bit more by stretching open our hips. So come into reverse pigeon pose. Now, if you want to work with keeping the spine long and not rounding the spine, which is what we're trying to do, you can put your foot on a wall or a piece of furniture so your upper body is super neutral. This is a great way to practice reverse pigeon pose because it allows for your spine to stay in a neutral place. And you can feel really well here that gap underneath your low back, the widening of your sit bones. So if you have somewhere to put your foot, try this variation. Root the femur bones into the pelvis, widen the sit bones. And then go ahead and relax. Change sides. Put the right foot on the wall or a piece of furniture, left foot on your knee. And depending on your flexibility, you might need to scooch further away from the wall or closer if this hip feels different than the other one. Feel how nice it is to elongate the spine, that we're not pulling our chin up and wrapping our hands around our hamstrings. So we have this capacity to keep the spine in a very neutral place. Feel the gap under your low back, widen the sit bones. How's your breath? All right, and then let's go ahead and relax. Bring your knees to your chest, roll over onto your side, and come up onto your hands and your knees. Then find your way to your seat. Grab a blanket or something. A blanket's preferable to sit on. So what a blanket does for seated forward folds is it tilts the pelvis. We have a neutral, we get to have that anterior tilt happen just by the blanket itself. Make sure you have a strap handy and a couple of blocks handy. So get everything wrapped up close by. All right, so just feel this first, what Dandasana feels like, to have an elongated spine with your legs stretched out straight. Now, this is where you get to decide, do you need to bend your knees a little bit? Okay, and if you do, for forward folds, you can grab another blanket so that your knees have some support underneath them. So feel those muscles along your spine kick in. Maybe even lift your arms up for a moment so you can really feel the muscles along your spine kick in. Engage your core. And then relax your arms. And notice if you want to slump, if you want to roll back onto your sacrum, if you want to slump your back. So Janu Shirshasana, take your left foot and bring it up. Sole of the foot comes to the inner thigh. If you need to support underneath your knee, stick a block there. If you need to support under this knee, your straight leg knee, put a blanket under there. Have whatever support you need, okay? We're going to take the strap around your foot, lift your spine. Feel those multifidus muscles be strong. Feel your core muscles stabilize you. And then come forward with a little bit of core. So try not to collapse. We're not falling. We're not melting our belly. We're not rounding our spine. We're engaging a bit through our core. We're engaging a bit through our spine. So we come forward with a long spine. Bend your knee as much as you need to so that you can feel the hamstring belly stretch instead of at the knee or just at the sit bone. Can you feel the anterior tilt of the pelvis helping you stretch your hamstring? Does your back feel neutral? All right, come back up. Bend both knees into your chest for a moment. And this is a very different feeling, I hope, than if you had your legs straight out and you were just rounding the spine. Okay, so let's try to keep ourselves as organized as we can in our posture. If you need support of a blanket underneath your knee or a blanket underneath or a block underneath your right knee, so find your posture for Janu Shirshasana. Make sure you're up on the edge of a blanket so you feel an anterior tilt of the pelvis. Elongate the spine, stretch forward. So you can use a strap, wrap it around your foot if you want. Feel the work of the strap. As you pull the strap, you can pull your elbows back toward your torso, which will engage your lats and give you a little extra support for the back body. Notice if your foot wants to turn out. See if you can flex your toes up. Feel your femur bone root down toward the earth. The knee is soft. There's work in the back body instead of rounding. How's your breath? Can you feel the crown and tail grow? Relax the shoulders. Are you supported with your core? Okay. Great. And then unwind the legs. Bring your knees back into your chest. Round your spine here a little bit if you want to. Breathe. Okay. All right, now we're gonna bring our legs wide. So we haven't yet really focused on the inner hamstrings. Let me move over a little bit. Staying on the sit bone, on the blanket. Now, if your knees need support, you can take a block or a blanket underneath each knee so that you have some support. You might need to be higher than one blanket, especially if you need a lot of support underneath your knees. Getting higher with your pelvis can be very supportive for this posture. Lift the spine. So we're not using a strap this time, but we're coming forward. See what it feels like to drop your head, to tilt your head just a little bit, coming into that forward fold feeling of introspection, while at the same time rooting your legs, extending the spine. Come back up. We're going to take a twist to each side. So left hand in front, right arm behind. Twist to the side. And come back to center and twist to the other side. Drop your shoulders. Feel the spine grow tall. And then come back. Hold the inner knees. Bring your knees in. Round your spine now. Tuck your chin toward your chest. Let all those multifidus muscles start to stretch. So let your back round, chin toward your chest. All right, then go ahead and find your way back onto your back. So be very mindful when we do this. I'll give you a couple of choices. First, just put your feet onto the ground and find neutral again. So let your back settle into some neutrality. Feel free to spin left and right for a twist if that's comforting to you. If your back needs some support, twist for the support. All right, now we're going to do either, you have 3 different choices. You can just bring your knees to your chest, which will round your back a little bit. And now we're working with rounding now, okay? Instead of trying to keep that gap under the low back. So you can be here. You can come into happy baby pose, where you're bringing your knees to the ribs and holding your feet. And then if you have something more to give to this pose, you can bring your knees over top and let them land over on your forehead, folding your hips a little bit. So this is pretty extreme, so do not feel obligated to try this. But I just want you to get the feeling that you are rounding the spine now. So either a modified plow pose, a happy baby pose, or knees into the chest. Let your back stretch and open. Breathe deeply. And then come out of that posture. Put your feet onto the ground, back to neutral. Lift up your hips, scooch them to the right, knees up, and drop them to the left. Open up your ribs. Twists can be nice to kind of counter some of the deep flexion before we go the other direction. And come back up, bring your knees back. Scoot your hips the other way, knees come high. Remember, you can always support underneath your knees, or your shins. If you can't go all the way to the floor, you can put your calf up on a block. All right, and then go ahead and release. Put your feet down onto the ground, neutral again. Now you get to decide how you want to neutralize the spine. For me, because forward bends and I don't always agree with each other, I like to have a little extension with a low block underneath my pelvis to kind of nourish my back after forward folding. Maybe that's not what your body needs. Maybe your body just is really happy to have done some forward folds and you just want to rest neutral pelvis on the ground.
Okay, so decide, maybe you want to do some windshield wipering left and right. Decide what's going to be best for you just for the next few breaths. We're going to move into legs up the wall pose in just a moment. But for now, just do anything that your body needs to kind of return itself to a neutral posture. All right. And then we're going to find our way to leg up the wall pose with an actual wall. So I'm going to come over to the wall. There's so many different ways you can do this pose. If you have lots of props, I'll show you the very traditional way of doing this, just in case you have the props to do it. So if you have a bolster or a lot of blankets, you can take 2 blocks against the wall with a gap, a hole between them. Let me move this forward. Oh, I'm messing my way. I hope you can see enough. And then the bolster or blankets here. So one of the things that you can do to get into this pose correctly is to make sure your butt is on the wall. So you want to actually sit on the wall and lie on your side and then swing your legs up. So my butt is in that little gap between the 2 blocks. My sit bones are kind of dropping down into that space and my legs are up the wall. So you can choose this variation, or if you don't want to go this high, which maybe this doesn't feel good or you don't have the props, you can be either flat on the ground, which might feel much nicer for some of you, or you can just have one thin blanket or whatever you have underneath your pelvis. I also often like to have a blanket under my head. There's something about just having my head up a little bit that helps me breathe better in this pose. So kind of experiment and see what props feel best to you. And if you're not right up against the wall, that's okay. Just go where you go. And there's a few things you can do with your legs once you're here. You can bend your knees and put your feet on the wall. You can butterfly your knees open, soles of the feet together, knees wide. You can cross your legs like you're sitting cross-legged. You can have your legs straight up, or you can have your legs, I'm hitting furniture, but you can have your legs wide like the letter V. And any of those variations can be, you can move around while you're here, or you can be still in one position. So if your back's a little tender, try some different things and see where you're best. Like for me right now, I want to bend my knees and put my feet on the wall. So you decide what feels best for your body. Whatever you're doing, you're breathing. And if you don't have a wall, you can always put your legs just up in the air. You can put your pelvis on a block and have your legs suspended in the air. You can have your knees bent and have your calves up on a chair or a couch or a bed. So there's lots of ways to modify. Viparita Karani is the name of this pose, leg up the wall pose. And it's a really great pose to let the femur bones drop into the pelvis again and feel that sense of neutral through the pelvis. Breathing well, enjoy the inversion, close your eyes and let that sense of introspection, the contemplation that can come when we are bending forward. The most important thing you're doing is breathing. At any time that you want, you can move your way out of the posture and into Shavasana.
So, because of all the work we did to strengthen and engage and stretch the hamstrings, let's try to think about having some support underneath your knees. You can lay flat if that's what your body needs, but perhaps consider a blanket underneath your knees so that your hamstrings are really neutral, really relaxed in the posture. Have some breaths. And as you settle yourself and come down into um, the restfulness of Shavasana, see if you can maintain with your eyes closed that sense of giving yourself over, the introspection, the contemplation, the deep rest. As you find yourself settling into the floor, can you let your limbs go? You know, the legs are so very heavy, your femur bones are big. Let's see if we can just drop those bones down. Not just your legs, but your arms too. Everything's settling. The spine coming into rest. Become the breath again, just feeling the belly receive softly, the lungs receive softly, the face is relaxed, melting the eyes. Trying not to strain to see behind closed lids, but allowing the closed lids to give your eyes rest. Begin to deepen your breathing again. And begin to stretch your body. Move in any way that suits. And maybe bring your knees to your chest, rock a little bit, soothe your spine. And come over onto your side and lift yourself up. And one more time, just sense as you sit, that sense of feeling your sit bones in the place where you're most comfortable. Relax your face, soften your eyes, come into the breath. Place your hands together. And let's bow in. Offer your intentions, your prayers outward. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.